All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of In the Clinch. As always, I'm John Cox, your co-host here, Theo, and today we have a very special guest, one of the best voices in all of sports, and one of the best mustaches in all of sports as well. UFC play-by-play commentator Jon Anik. John, thank you for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Fellas, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Good. First off, before we get into any of this MMA stuff, you're a local guy, Boston guy. What do you think of Mac Jones and these Patriots?
So yesterday I wasn't able to see a snap. Obviously yesterday it wasn't a good effort against the New Orleans Saints because I was traveling back from UFC 266. But, it's certainly a better box score than some of the other rookie quarterbacks that are out there, and obviously the pick six, the Jonnu Smith interception, one of the few highlights I did see was not on him. Right. I'm excited, but with caution, right? Like he's less mobile than Tom Brady. Let's be clear about that. He's slower than Tom right now. So if he wants to lean into the strength and conditioning and the pliability and certain things that have helped Tom navigate that pocket, I think he can be elite because he has the tools that you like, the accuracy, the leadership, the brain, the work ethic. But his strength and conditioning and his willingness to make himself more fleet of foot is going to have to be prioritized, or I don't think that he's going to be, as good as he can be.
Sweet.
All right. Do you think they make the playoffs at all? I'm curious.
Again, I had expectations that they were going to beat the Saints as 3-point home favorites. And obviously I didn't see what, they did or didn't do defensively, but I think it's going to be tough if you're 1-3, so, but I do think that roster wise, the 45 that they dress on game day, I think it's a playoff team on paper. So we'll see.
I think it is too. Yeah, I agree. So it was International Fight Week. I'm just curious what your experience was like. I know it's hectic usually down there in Las Vegas and everything, especially with what's going on with COVID and stuff like that. Guys coming from all different countries all around the world. Was it more ramped up than it usually is for International Fight Week as far as COVID protocols and all that stuff goes?
Not necessarily, man. It felt pretty loose, if I'm being totally honest. It was a whirlwind, even talking to you guys, I feel like I'm a little bit browned out right now and underslept. And I hope that doesn't register as a complaint, but International Fight Week for a lot of us is just crazy. It's just one event to the next, morning weigh-in to hosting UFC Live to just all sorts of different obligations. I can tell you guys, I was going to talk about this on our podcast today, but I had a crew from UFC.com that was tracking me this weekend, in my room, filming me, doing my voiceovers and things like that. So we have some behind the scenes content coming up later this week. So it was just crazy. Hall of Fame, had a celebration of life for my dear friend and our former makeup artist, Susie Freeton, it was just an emotional, crazy week. But I got to tell you, man, one of the more memorable pay-per-views I've ever called. And, it didn't drag for a minute. So that certainly helped me at the end of a long week.
Yeah, it's a fantastic fight card.
Yeah, definitely a crazy fight week. You're right about that. And leading up to the event, we also found out that Joe Rogan wasn't going to be working as part of the commentary team for that event. When Joe's not in attendance for those big pay-per-view fights, does it really change the dynamic at all, the broadcast team? What kind of adjustments do you have to make in order to compensate for when Joe's not there?
Well, I think you make adjustments on any given night, right? Sometimes during a given fight, you might get less or more from a broadcast partner. Sometimes maybe I'll notice an analyst, the energy wanes a little bit. So I got to pick them up at certain points and then maybe they ramp it up again later in the night. It's a very special dynamic, obviously, when Joe is there and there's nobody that can necessarily do what Joe does. And then I think reciprocally, there are other guys that bring different skill sets to the table, but it's always more special when he is there. And it's amazing for me to sort of see people read way too much into his absence. This is a COVID-19 climate in which dates can get shifted around. And, when Joe sells out an arena for a comedy show or commits to a hunting trip that a lot of people take very seriously, it's sometimes it's hard to get out of those commitments, but rest assured, he's going to be doing these domestic pay-per-views. I've said to a lot of people, he'll probably last longer than I do. So I'm excited for the chance to hopefully work with him for decades to come.
Absolutely. So it's just sticking on the topic of the commentary team. There's a lot of you guys that they kind of shuffling through: Brendan Fitzgerald, DC, Paul Felder, yourself, Joe. I'm just curious, how do you guys make that work so well? Because it almost seems like you're never fumbling over each other's words. You have the insight, obviously, of Daniel Cormier and Paul Felder, who are former fighters. They know what they're talking about. They have their own special, unique sets in there. How do you guys make it go so fluidly? And you yourself, maybe having some MMA experience, but not quite a fighter, how do you talk about the fights as well as you do with these guys who have obviously been to the upper echelon and the top tier of fighting, DC being the champion, Paul Felder being, I believe, 6th ranked at his highest. These are legitimate fighters who know what they're talking about. How do you mingle in there without feeling like you're not knowing what you're talking about?
Well, no, I appreciate the kind words on the broadcast. We had someone reach out to us and say, I can't believe I'm saying this, from the southwestern part of the United States, but you guys have me watching you guys and not college football just for the commentary. I don't even like the fights, Right. So that's the ultimate compliment, obviously, for us. But in terms of that navigation, I'm just trying to be as listenable as possible over 8 hours. That's the truth, right? Like my background is in sports radio, and we were working on 1510 The Zone, the sporting news radio affiliate in Boston. And you go down the dial WEEI, where I always wanted to work, and they interrupted each other all afternoon. And we weren't doing that, So for me, that's a charge and a challenge that I take very seriously. And in a 3-man booth, when Joe Rogan stops talking, DC is there. So maybe I'll give it a beat, give it a chance for the former 2-time, or 2-division UFC champion to actually get in there instead of, a play-by-play guy from Boston who, wanted to be in the NBA. So I try to stay in my lane as best I can. Obviously when the fight hits the ground, you're not going to hear a lot from me, and Dana White's not itching to hear more from me in those situations. But this is not about ego for me. It's not about fame, it's really not. At the end of the day, it's about having a job that you don't dislike. And thankfully, I love mine very much. And I also think we're not doing radio. So in television, less is more. When in doubt, lay out. And, that's kind of the way I've sort of approached it. And, just trying to get better every show, honestly.
Yeah. Real quick, before we get into the main events, all the top 3 things, I just want to talk real quick. How about your boy Ray Longo's guy, Merab, getting it done? One of the best comebacks we've seen in the division for sure, but almost in UFC history. I mean, that fight was incredible from start to finish, and I hammered a money line, so I was happy about the comeback.
There's so much. Good for you. There's so much to unpack on this. I honestly don't even know where to begin with it. I'll just say I think Keith Peterson's refereeing style has evolved since he made a mistake in that Dominic Cruz fight, because not only did he give Merab a chance to recover, but, I thought there were instances in which he should have stopped that fight and let Marlon kind of live to fight another day. And that really flies in the face of him not giving Dominic Cruz much time in the championship situation. So that's one takeaway. I don't know what is in the water in Georgia. And maybe it isn't just the Georgians. Merab is just a really unique individual. Anyone who's listened to the Anik and Foreign podcast knows that if he gets cut in training, he goes in the back and glues it together himself. There's not really a way to fatigue the man. And you hear a lot of people say, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And a fighter's greatest fear is not bleeding or getting torched in the octagon. It's getting tired in the octagon. Yeah. And as yet, these trainers haven't really figured out a way to physically fatigue this man. And I don't have to tell you guys, as educated as you are, how empowering that is, when you're fighting another man. So I think Merab draws a lot of faith in that. What Ray will probably say on the podcast today is that when he was watching film on Marlon, he sort of came to the realization, look, my athlete is not Corey Sandhagen. He's not going to be able to just evade all of this with footwork. You're probably going to have to walk through some shit and maybe get a concussion. And Merab sort of looked at him and was like, I'll die in there, coach. And as you saw, he's willing to die in there. And what's nice now is that Merab's going to be in the top 6 in the world, and he's going to be impossible to deny. So what a fight. I can't wait to celebrate with Ray today.
Fantastic.
And we'd be remiss, John, if we didn't bring up the Nick Diaz show that was this past weekend. He was a huge talking point. He was a huge talking point the whole week, but there was no story that was bigger than his decision to change the fight to 185 instead of 170. Did that change to middleweight, change how you thought the fight would go at all?
Knowing what I know now, and I can't really get into the details as to some of the stuff that Nick was dealing with, I guess I just wish that he had tried to make it 85 a little bit before fight week, because obviously I think if you looked at him, he didn't look like a guy who could make welterweight. Seemingly he was in better shape 6 or 8 weeks ago, and there were some things that he needed to navigate. He's just an absolute legend. When I was working at ESPN, 2005, 6, 7, and I was trying to get people into mixed martial arts because none of my friends were watching it, certainly. I was telling them to watch Nick Diaz. So for me to get the chance to watch him compete live and to call one of his fights was certainly a treat. But this wasn't your prototypical Nick Diaz fight in certain respects. I mean, yeah, it was punches and bunches. Yes, it was his great chin and, his ability to just land and throw at a historic rate. But as I said on the post-fight show, there was no scowl, there was no sort of meanness or particular focus in his eyes. So I do think when we see Nick back in 6 months, ideally he'll be better than he was this night, even though he got some things done in the fight. But I don't know. I think the performance, while it had its moments, he wasn't prime. He wasn't primal, which I'm surprised to say, but sport's better with him in it.
Yeah,
so hopefully he'll be back in 6 months. And I think he will. I think he wants to fight.
That's
And
interesting.
there was a bunch of stuff in the week. There was that interview with Brett where people kind of raised concern because he said he didn't really want to fight. Then there was also that shadow boxing video the UFC did for promotion where people thought he looked really slow and withered. Did any of that make you feel a little bit concerned about how this fight might go at all?
No, I mean, I think there were a lot of rumblings as to things that were going on. I think the other thing too was that Robbie Lawler, even though recent results haven't been great, he's in shape. He's training his ass off, and
right.
I can sit here and tell you, young man, at 43, for me, like I work out 6 days a week, and at 43, man, it doesn't even matter. It's like I'm still fat, so I just feel like Robbie is working really hard, and it's a favorable matchup for Robbie in a lot of respects. And, I think that was part of the problem, just that he fought a man who was better tonight. I think Nick knew he was going to be fighting a really in shape Robbie Lawler. But yeah, I thought Nick looked a little bit slow, and I think he'll look faster in 6 months. I really do, but I didn't read too much into it during fight week because you just don't want to do that too much. Like, I'm contractually prevented from betting on the UFC, right? And we hear all these things, right? Like, I'll tell you guys, we sort of intimated a little bit about this, but like Valentina Shevchenko, we heard going into the Andrade fight that she was like sick as a dog. She looked ill in our fighter meeting, going into the Andrade fight. Certainly didn't fucking matter on fight night.
Right.
So.
Yeah, she's unbelievable, and we'll get to her very shortly. So obviously Nick Diaz is a big return. Their rematch, 17 years into making his first fight in 6 years. A fan favorite, obviously. It seemed like the T-Mobile Arena just lit up the way it does for a Conor fight, for anything like that. I know you commented on the certain aroma in the stadium as soon as the Diaz brothers walked out. What was the atmosphere like in there, and what did it feel like just around the cage?
Well, I'm just trying to paint a picture at the end of the day, right? And anyone who hasn't been to Nevada in the last 3 or 4 years, understand this marijuana climate, okay? Everywhere you go in Vegas now, you smell weed in the hallway at your hotel, in the lobby at your hotel, in the casinos, on the streets. It is omnipresent. So it didn't dawn on me until, the fight started. It seemed like everybody was waiting to smoke until Nick walked out, I didn't smell it all night. And then it literally took over the arena. So I'm really trying to paint a picture at the end of the day. But yeah, it's just special, man. It's just, I don't know how you quantify like the top 5 biggest superstars in the UFC right now and what metrics you would use to determine that. But these Diaz brothers resonate on a near Conor level. I mean, it's just madness when they compete. And I think if you're looking at the top 5 superstars right now, it's obviously Conor is number 1, and there's a gap between him and Nate Diaz, who's probably 2. And if Masvidal's 3, Nick Diaz is probably 4. So
yeah. And it just shows to show how popular they are, that he can come back after so long off. Not a ton of fight promotion too. I mean, they had the fight booked and announced a few months out, but still just to come back out of nowhere and have that huge pop and the support and the fans right away. The chance of Diaz at the beginning of the fight, it's like just one of those fighters that's like, it's happy I'm glad I got to see him fight at least one more time. If not, if he doesn't keep going, but like you said, I think he might keep fighting as well.
Yeah, and I can just relate to him on a lot of levels, whether it comes to social anxiety or marijuana or wanting to just, I can't necessarily say what I want to say all the time like he does, right? But I think in many respects, even though he grew up in a more hardened environment than I did, I can relate to him in a lot of aspects of life. And again, he was just an athlete that resonated with me in this sport early on. And, I really do hope that, it's not just the financials, that he really wants to come back and get back into an active competition schedule.
Right. And we mentioned before that Valentina Shevchenko, she got to finish over Lauren Murphy in the 4th round. We've known for a while that she's the best to ever do a women's flyweight, but where does she even go from here? Like, what other challenges can Valentina seek out?
I mean, I wish you guys could pull up the top 5, honestly, right now, but I guess it's probably all women that she has beaten, right? In terms of
Right.
the flyweight division, this gets tricky. Thankfully, Lauren Murphy emerged and won 5 consecutive fights and made herself impossible to deny. I thought Joanne Calder would beat Lauren Murphy in Murphy's previous fight, right? So I think JoJo Calderwood is certainly a viable option and would be a fresh option. I would like to see an improved Caitlin Chukagian potentially. I'm a big fan of hers, and I do think she's a much better fighter now, having gone through that Shevchenko experience. I don't know how many cuts down to 135 pounds Amanda Nunes has in her career left. I really don't. And I think therein lies the rub, because I do think there's going to be a time for the UFC to strike with that trilogy fight. And I think there are going to be 2 questions, where is Amanda relative to the contenders in her division? Because I think most of us expect Valentina will still be the flyweight champion without much of a challenge, and then what is Amanda's appetite to give Valentina that fight, right? Can the UFC, depending on how much they'd make on that fight, make it worth Amanda's while to give Valentina a trilogy fight when she's up 2-0, because Amanda's putting her status as all-time great, the GOAT, on the line when she fights Valentina. I guess you could say when she fights Juliana Pena, she's doing that too, but you know what I mean. So I don't know, man. I just think it's largely, as I said on the post-fight show, dominant champions, whether it's the New England Patriots or George St. Pierre, are good for sport.
Right.
This championship fight, I don't think was good for sport. So
yeah, it's hard to get into because it just seems like there is no answer for Valentina Shevchenko or respectively Amanda Nunes. It's these two, and we've seen them fight twice now. I believe it was the second one was a lot closer than the first one. You can debate that it maybe 1-1, but with her up 2-0, Amanda Nunes, it is tough to try to remake that for a third time. But I feel like that's the only championship women's fight that's going to sell right now is those two.
Well, and you wonder if Amanda would like to have more finality on the rivalry, because that second fight between Shevchenko and Nunes, I would have to go back and watch it right now. But it seemed like people were split, and it did seem like a lot of the media thought Valentina Shevchenko beat her. And could you imagine how much the narrative has changed? I mean, it's crazy. Like, Shevchenko fought Amanda in 2 of her first 5 UFC appearances when the flyweight division didn't exist, and then she moves up to flyweight and she has all but killed a woman. You know what I mean? And the other thing too, with respect to sort of the training camps of these fellow flyweights, it's like, it's going to take such a physical commitment, right? To get yourself in the shape of your life like you've never been before to even have any sort of chance against Valentina. And then I think you're going to have to do something crazy and really throw caution to the wind and take some risks. And with respect to Lauren Murphy, she wasn't willing to do that. And Lauren and Joe Murphy are 2 of my most favorite people in the sport, but we got to call it like it is, And I will tell you, like, Juliana Pena and Valentina, the way she beat her in a main event that quickly was very surprising to me.
Mm-hmm.
Juliana Pena is a dog and has that dog in her. And I can assure you that she is going to go for it when she gets her title shot.
Yeah,
so, Amanda, and it's somewhat of an advantage for Amanda, and speaks to even greater how special what Valentina's doing. Because Amanda's not minus 1,500, right, against Juliana Pena. Like, Amanda knows, like, if she don't put in a great training camp, like, you're not just going to walk in there and beat Juliana Pena.
Right. We do want to get to this. We know we only got a couple more minutes with you. For sure, Saturday's main event, one of the best championship fights we've seen in a very long time, if ever. Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega defeats him with the unanimous decision. Brian Ortega, I want to know how the hell Volkanovski got out of 1, that guillotine, and then 2, that triangle choke, because I also hedged my bet on Brian Ortega by submission, so I was a little upset about that, but it is what it is. That was one of the tightest guillotines I think I've seen in a very long time. Even Volkanovski said it. They said, I think the quote was, "Holy fuck, I'm about to lose the belt deep," or something like that. So I'm curious, what was it like to call that fight, the back and forth? That third round was phenomenal.
Well, obviously my experience tells me it was pretty damn tight as well, even though thankfully I've never been in one. And until my bosses tell me I got to go do practice on Tuesday, I'm not going to do it. But no, I mean, I think it speaks to 2 things. It speaks to heart and repetition. And even though submission offense isn't what it used to be in the UFC, and even though Alexander Volkanovski, doesn't have submission offensively at the forefront of his mind. His submission defense is outstanding, and they spend a ton of time in these bad positions and getting out of these bad positions. And when you parlay that with his championship heart and a mentality that is that of a guy who's not going to tap, I'm not all that surprised, but what a confidence booster for Volkanovski moving forward, fighting the preeminent jiu-jitsu guy in the sport, being in triangles and guillotines and all of these things and being able to get out. Volkanovski, he's incredible. He was already a top 5 pound for pound guy, but 20 straight wins, I just hope we can continue to celebrate him, because my pay-per-view open essentially was like, this guy deserves better. And when Khabib Nurmagomedov had a winning streak like this, he was the talk of the town. So hopefully Volkanovski is, I could go on and on about Ortega's toughness and everything else, coming back and winning the 5th round. But Volkanovski was dominant for a lot of this fight. And what he did after those chokes at the end of round 3 is the stuff of fucking legend, absolutely incredible. You could have even stopped that fight at the end of round 3. Honestly, those Ortega visuals, I'm telling you, if that was a non-title fight, that fight probably gets stopped.
Yep.
Right. That's actually interesting. I was going to ask you if it should have been stopped or not, because a lot of people online saw that Brian was just laying there, and then the physician thing was, it was a little confusing. Like, the questions didn't really make sense. So yeah, that's interesting. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about this piece of news that came out during the week. John Jones was arrested last week on a misdemeanor domestic violence charge. When Jones was charged on 4 offenses last April, you told MMAfighting.com that you thought that he, quote, bottomed out. Given the history of Jones and your own personal interactions with him, what do you make of that whole situation?
Oh man, it's really tough, Theo, and I guess he hadn't bottomed out in a lot of respects. But I love this guy, right? Like, when he talks to you, as he did me for 45 minutes backstage at the Hall of Fame, like, he's not looking at his phone. He's looking you in the eye. He's asking me about the commentary job. He's asking me about my kids. He's there. He's present. Like, I really have an appreciation for him one-on-one, and how much he does appreciate his teammates and his family. They were so excited to see him go into the Hall of Fame. But obviously he decided to turn it up thereafter. And, whatever he's putting into his body is sort of creating this guy that can't control himself in these situations. And it's just really, really sad. And domestic sort of, it seems to intimate that, there was some contact with somebody in his family. So it's just really sad. And I know he was behaving himself in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I don't know, it's really sad. Like,
right.
You're still going to hear me come to his defense. I know when you have a headline that I think I also said, it is embarrassing for his daughters, and I do think that's the hardest navigation. As a guy with daughters, I'm just getting emotional, but because it's, for me, it's like, I'm in the public eye, and it stands to reason if I'm doing your podcast in 5 years, by that time I've done something fucking stupid and my name's up in lights and my daughters are having to, I'm having to deal with that, So I just think, what do you say to your daughters now? But I just hope that, I hope it's not as bad as we think it is. And, I just hope that he can get the right help, to just, because the thing is, it's asking a lot of his support system, right, to be with him every step of the way on these nights and make sure he doesn't, get himself in hot water. The onus has got to be on him.
Sweet.
Well said, John.
So I know we're crunched for time here. We're going to ask you 2 quick last questions here. So we have UFC 267, UFC 268 coming up back-to-back weekends. First off, which fight on those 2 cards intrigues you the most? And I know as recently as last year you were training, and I'm just curious, can all these bantamweights still get it? When's that first fight coming?
All right, well, let me ask you guys real quick on 267 and 268. Is it a cop-out if I say Covington Usman? Because
no, not at all.
Definitely not. That's the one I
mean, why are they doing this fight, right? Like, Leon Edwards has to know in his heart of hearts, right, that what happened at UFC 245, like Dana White, it's not promotional hype. That was one of the greatest championship fights ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Covington hit Kamaru Usman with some of the biggest shots that I have ever seen, and Kamaru just fucking ate them, Mm-hmm. It's one of the greatest fights of all time. Colby Covington is one of the best pound for pound fighters I have ever seen. His performance against Robbie Lawler, one of the greatest singular performances in UFC history. And then came out and beat Tyron Woodley. Like, he deserves this opportunity. And I think the Dana White Kamaru Usman relationship right now is so strong, and that's why they were able to make this fight. And I'm just really excited for that rematch. I mean, there's so many fights. I'm excited for Glover to get his opportunity, on and on it goes. But dude, Covington Usman too, with respect. I love you, Leon Edwards, but you had to make that rematch. I cannot wait to call it. And as far as you know, my fighting future is concerned, there are a lot of amateur athletes out there that are training really hard. So I ain't trying to take their shine. You know, this was more me about, I think, kind of wanting to compete against my twin brother in a controlled setting with a controlled rule set. I think the big variable for me is, like, certainly I'm in shape right now. Like, I think I'm probably within 4 to 6 months of making 136 pounds if I had to. But again, it's like, I might sound like a real softie here, but I have been hospitalized with 3 concussions in my life. So before I was ever to do anything where I took a shot to the head, I would have to get my brain scanned. So I thought with my brother, we could do sort of like, you know, neck and down body shots, maybe with a little grappling involved, but no leg locks or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens. You know, I do think there are a lot of people out there who do want to fight me. And, you know, I would like to compete at some point. But I think 2023 is more realistic than next year, but you never know. If the right offer comes in and it's the right charity, we'd probably get a brain scan and take the bait.
Sweet. So there's our headline. As we wrap up here, Jon, honestly, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is awesome for me. Definitely a bucket list item. Super humble guy. We can't wait to see you back in Boston, hopefully soon. You got to tell Dana to bring some goddamn fights back here, man. This is where it all started. So
I know. I thought we would have been there by now, but as the state continues to open up, are you guys both New England guys or no?
Yep, sir.
I thought we might cancel after the Red Sox got swept by the Yankees. Although I don't even know that it really matters all that much, candidly. You know, you just have to see how this week plays out. But I do think in a 1-game setting, I like the Fighting Alex Corres to get it done. So
So thank you again. Honestly, this has been the best. This is awesome. And hopefully next time you're in Boston, we can buy you a beer or something.
Yeah, let's do it. And we'll do the podcast again. And hopefully I don't get arrested before that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jon. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Jon.
Thank you,
appreciate
guys.
it a lot.
Have a good day.
Man. You too.
Appreciate you guys.